Okay, it's been a long day. It's been a very, very rich day, and with these 5 parallel sessions, there really is the need to sort of try to bring things together at the very end. So what will happen in this session now, you will first hear 5 reports, very concise, only 3 minutes, just some highlights so that you get a feeling what were the main discussion points in these breakout sessions. Then I will pose one joint question to all of the rapporteurs to sort of bring it back to the topic of our conference and sort of the meaning of resilience. And then the floor is open, depending on how much time we still have. Then we have a slight addition to the program. We are very fortunate now to have former Director General of IIASA, Detlof von Winterfeld, here. You have Pavel Kabad already yesterday, and of course Albert was giving the keynote. Detlof kindly volunteered to say a few words, his reflections on the IIASA anniversary, and then Albert will have the concluding ceremony with also the poster awards, a very important part of this. So since time is running, I think we should just go in the order of the sessions as they are listed in the program. So the first would be Brian, then reporting on achieving resilience in a complex world. The floor is yours. Oh, you want to do it from here, maybe?
Hello, hello, testing. Hello, there we go, right? Okay, thank you. And thanks again for hosting all of this. So we had a session that I think built nicely from the plenaries yesterday and also the morning in terms of we all know that there's a problem. We are in overshoot. We are headed towards ecological collapse along with social dissent and so on. But what are we going to do about it, right? And so we've gathered together here today system thinkers from around the world and applications of system science. And so our session was really about trying to get some insight and input from that. And again, what do we do? So I had posed questions to the speakers, and I'll just summarize then briefly what some of the highlights I think were. So our first speaker, Hans Liljenström from Sweden, had talked about needing multi-dimensional, multi-scalar approaches, going from the macro, meso, and micro, meso, and macro, and dealing with top-down and bottom-up approaches. I think he made the very important comment that it's not just about minimizing negative aspects, but about maximizing positive benefits. So sustainability is not doing less bad, but it's about actually doing good. Our next speaker was May Britt, who is a Sami nationalist from Sweden, and she talked about the challenges that colonialism has had on her peoples and around the world, and that it's not just a past experience, but it's an ongoing pressure that they're always feeling. She talked about the bad relationship that she feels that the current dominant paradigm has with nature, and that we need to recognize nature as an animated living being, which is also, I think, very consistent with the ideas that we were promoting as far as needing a paradigm shift, and we're open for anything that seems to work better. Dan Fiskus then picked up on those themes and talked about the science as part of the root cause, the current paradigm of science, which is overly reductionistic and overly analytical, not being holistic enough, not being organic enough, and not being life-centered enough, and the fact that we treat life as a mechanism when we know that life actually regenerates. Machines don't regenerate, but life does, so we need to change our mental model. He also made the very important point that one way to get this change is lead by example, that we just be consistent within ourselves, and then we can tell the story about the successes that we have rather than having to manipulate other people. Sybil gave a very nice talk about modeling as the answer to all the questions, but in a very nice way, particularly things like participatory modeling and the idea that systems thinking will eventually lead to an ecological worldview, which is encouraging. So. Marina Fischer-Kozlowski was slated to be the next speaker, but was ill, so I tried my best to give her slides on social metabolism. But I think what was important with hers was that she mentioned that social metabolism is based on the idea of a biophysical basis for economics, and that we have the limits, and that relative decoupling so far has not worked, that we need to really think post-growth as the next phase of reality. Otto then gave a very wonderful advice and gift to IIASA. He said there's 3 things that IIASA should be thinking about going forward, which is to be restless, to be irreverent, and to be fair. And so if we can instill those more into our working model, that would be very useful. Ursula Scharler talked about some local examples in South Africa and the local circumstances and the importance of communication and how what we really need to do is to highlight alternative pathways of the future, even crazy ones, just to get people thinking about different futures and accepting those. And then lastly, Harold Katzmir gave a summary about rough systems analysis, saying that we might not know all the answers, and it's not just about big data, but it's about rough data, it's about warm data, and even though we want to have a systems approach, he said, dare to be simple. So in your communication, we should try to be effective in our communication.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Very strong, very fast, lots of information, but it was a really nice summary. So we go on to Linda about the new data for understanding complex systems.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to summarize the session. Obviously, the focus is on new data. So what do we mean by that? So big data from Earth observation, mobility data from mobile phones, for example, data from citizen science and crowdsourcing, open data on COVID-19, but also more traditional data, such as data from demography, data on emissions. But the difference is that these were packaged and presented in very clever and innovative ways. So we were shown some examples of, for example, the use of Google mobility data in combination with data from COVID-19 that helped us to understand the geography of the early spread of COVID in Ireland. And here the emphasis was really on flexible modeling solutions and open data and how that can really enhance our understanding of COVID-19. And particularly in how the messages were communicated using variables that the public can understand. We also saw some examples of data from citizen science and crowdsourcing, in particular how data from citizen science are already contributing to the monitoring of the SDGs, but that there is still so much untapped potential in this area. We also saw a very inspiring example of how existing citizen science data have been used in the official reporting of an SDG indicator on marine plastics. And this actually makes Ghana the first country to use citizen science data in the official reporting of this indicator. In another example, we saw crowdsourcing, so data from Earth observation in combination with artificial intelligence and how that can be used to build an accurate model to predict deforestation in the Amazon. And this could actually be put into operational use really quite easily. And then we saw how JRC is spearheading efforts in the field of computational social science for policy applications. And what was really remarkable there is that they were involving the stakeholders in determining how these new big data sources can be used to fill policy needs. There were some nice illustrations provided, for example, how mobility data are being used to assess the economic impacts of Tier 3 COVID restrictions in Italy. Okay, so the big takeaways for me then, first, communication and visualization of data are not only extremely important, but they also provide new insights from existing data. In fact, I would really call this surprises. And this was really exemplified in the presentation by Wolfgang Fengler from World Data Lab, and he showed us these amazing dashboards and applications. So for example, did you know that we have passed a tipping point in which half of the world, so 4 billion people out of 8 billion people, are now in the middle to upper classes? And that this will continue to increase so that by 2040, this will be 6 billion. And where will this come from? From Asia. So it's these kinds of facts that are really interesting, and I would like to just show you one quick example, because this was really quite fun. If you could show that website. So this is one of the websites from World Data Lab. Maybe it will come up. Anyway. Okay, so basically, it's about how long will you live? So I know this is in German, don't worry too much about that. I put my birth date in there. If you could just scroll down slightly, it will show you it'll show you some facts. Yep, so there first, could you go down a little bit there? Okay, so basically, so 82% of the world, no, gosh, my German is bad, isn't it? It's the other way around. So I'm old, basically. That's what that says, okay? And then if we go further down, this is quite interesting. It'll tell me how long I'm going to live. Just a little bit, almost almost there. Okay, so I have, no, a little bit longer. There, I'm going to live another 32.7 years. So I'll be 89 years old when I die. I put Canada in, because that's where I'm from. Interestingly, both my parents died at the age of 89. Okay, and then if I put Austria in, I will live an extra 12 days. But there's obviously comparability. But anyway, I just wanted to show you that there are these just great ways of taking existing data and just visualizing them in such great ways for insights.
Right.
Okay, so that just a few more takeaways and I'll be done. Okay, open data and open software are very important, and I think many of the applications shown in the session wouldn't have been possible if we didn't have that. But it's also about transparency and trust, and I think those are topics that have been discussed a lot over the last day and a half. Yes, there is uncertainty, and there are good ways to communicate it, but this should not stop us from using data in ways that increase our understanding of complex problems, or of raising awareness, like that example I showed you. And there were many other great examples that Wolfgang showed us, so I would encourage you to look at the recording of the session. And finally, we need a way to unlock the vast quantities of data that are basically sitting in private organizations, because these are the kinds of data that can really help us to solve many of the sort of global problems that we have. But unfortunately, we didn't solve that problem during the session, but how we do that remains to be seen.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Very interesting. And just a footnote that this website that you show from Wolfgang, that's actually mostly based on IIASA data, and he's closely collaborating with Samir KC in getting this population data up there. So the next report is from Taher on sustainable management of water, energy, food, land, ecosystems nexus.
Thank you. Yeah, we also had a very good session with 5 outstanding speakers from both academia and development agencies. Together, they provided a range of expertise from biophysical, economic modeling, governance analysis, stakeholder engagement, and policy advice. We discussed 3 topics: importance of nexus thinking in the context of a global change, required advances in nexus modeling to be able to address ongoing and future challenges, and the implementation challenges for linking nexus science to policy and practice, and ways to improve that. So the conclusion from the session are the following. So system analysis was the basis for nexus thinking. Nexus thinking is about managing interlinkages among sectors, but also among regions and over time. So here the importance of the transboundary and intertemporal dimensions, which should lead then to a great stronger coherence among sectoral and regional policy. Nexus thinking has been applied in the context of food, water, energy, but should cover in the future ecosystems and economy. In terms of modeling, Nexus model would benefit from ground truth checking for model validation and fine-tuning, a better representation of a human behavior, and integrating the spatial data that is becoming available from advanced monitoring technologies. In terms of the practical implication, it is clear to us that there will be no solution if we don't think in a nexus term. Nexus is not a luxury. It is the way we should look at problems. For example, solution to water problems is not only water-based. It should cover much more sectors. And we also concluded that it is time to move from nexus research to nexus management. And to do that, we suggest that we improve science communication to policymakers and to change the way project funding is done currently, which is more sectorally focused, in addition to institutional improvement that should foster intersectoral dialogue and coordination. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this nexus is clearly sort of one of the highlights of what IIASA is doing. It's already linking so many different fields. And of course, as we heard from many other presentations, there's of course a need to also have the social, the human dimensions still included, as IIASA as a whole institute tries to do. Okay, next we go to Elena about the new frontiers in systems analysis, theories, methods, and tools.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Wolfgang. Can I exactly continue on what you just mentioned? And that is the human dimension, because IIASA for the last 50 years, I think, has been has done a lot of work and has been famous for developing really advanced, rigorous mathematical methods. And some of our former directors present here, some of our colleagues that are also present here can confirm that. And we had operations research methods developed at IIASA, optimal control, and so on and so forth, statistics, and you name it. So this has been the history of IIASA until recently, and I think many of you will probably agree that what is also required, so what has been done, of course, is useful and plays an important role, but what is also required is to really move people in the center of systems analysis, so to make them really an integral part of that. And we thought that for the parallel session with such a broad name, tools, methods, and approaches and systems analysis, we would actually choose this focus and review, of course, only very few out of many, but a few that we thought were very innovative, exciting, and promising approaches and methods how to move people into the center of systems analysis. And essentially, this has two elements, if I simplify it. One element is to improve realism of existing formal models. Assumptions, data, everything that goes into models should be more realistic in terms of how they account for humans, for constraints that come from human nature, for what is possible and what is not possible politically, culturally, and so on and so on. So that's one dimension. And the other dimension is more literally bringing people into research, humans, all kinds of participatory research, stakeholder interactions, and such kind of things. And very often, actually, in specific studies, these two things go hand in hand. So it's not that one does one or the other. Very often, it's actually a combination. And I think this combination is actually something that makes it powerful and that makes systems analysis research more relevant and providing more adequate solutions. So I cannot, I think, now go through all examples, but let me mention a few. I would like to focus actually on research that is being done at IIASA in this direction. So we had a talk from Elina Bruchin, who explained to us a very interesting approach that they are now developing an ECE program to include constraints on the governance capacity, such that scenarios that go into integrated assessment models are more realistic, and it's very interesting work that she presented to us. And the second example, again from IIASA research presented by Valeria Havalera, showed how one can include different models and different model owners, be it national teams or international teams, together. So if we would like to have global level models, but accounting for specifics of national constraints or values or views, one can actually bring many different models together in this kind of multi-model sort of conglomerate being coordinated by very advanced machine learning, reinforcement learning techniques. And that is also something very innovative that we are now developing in the ASA program. And as I said, there were other very interesting talks. It looks like I cannot cover them now, but let me still say one thing. So we also had a very inspiring talk, I think, from Martin Novak, who reminded us about how game theoretic approaches can also be helpful to understand cooperation. And cooperation is such a fundamental phenomenon for achieving sustainability. And he showed to us in these 15 minutes how by very stylized and rather simple models, one can actually derive very interesting and far from obvious insights on how to induce and sustain cooperation. And I think that this is really very, very important in the current times, and we can learn from that. And other three talks, I really apologize that I cannot now say something about them. That's not because they were less interesting. This is because Wolfgang is standing there and looking at me with the critical eye. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. So the last report is given by Tomasz Schinko, Integrating Science with Policy and Societies, Lessons from Applied Systems Analysis.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think I will link immediately to the human dimension with this. And I think this is one of the key sessions also from a IIASA perspective. So when I came to IIASA as a YSSP student, there was a flag saying science for policy, I think. And I think now we're transforming towards science with policy, with society. And I think in this session, we have discussed, critically reflected on our experiences doing transdisciplinary research at the intersection of science, policy, and society, and showing in case studies that our role is really changing from being an advisor to society to really a partner of society in decision-making processes. And we've been critically reflecting experiences, discussing lessons learned. We have seen that there are different approaches. There's more like a top-down approach where policy making is knocking on our doors and saying, okay, we have this explicit or implicit question, could you help us answer it? And there might be some money involved, there's funding. And then there's the bottom-up approach where us scientists think and feel, okay, there is a need to engage more strongly with society to really find solutions and options for solutions. But then we have to figure out, okay, how can we do this actually? How can we get funding for that? And also Albert mentioned in his keynote yesterday, we need to have this enabling environment. And we had in our session not only researchers, we also had decision makers, and we had representatives from funding agencies, from the FFG, from the NSF, from Belmont Forum. And they actually said that they are quite far already, and I'm really reassured now that this kind of research in science that we are trying and striving for at IIASA, we can do that, we can also find funding for that. It doesn't always trickle down to the national scale, so that's also something we have discussed. Sometimes in the international sphere, it's easier to find this kind of transdisciplinary research enabling environment than at the national scale, but also there things are changing. And then we have also discussed more the bottom-up approaches, this really participatory processes. We've seen this takes a lot of patience, a lot of time, many years. It's not like having 2 stakeholder workshops. It's like having many workshops, having many pre-interviews, really knowing the questions, co-designing what are actually the problems, identifying what are the different agendas and frames of the problem, and then work towards a compromise solution. I think we have seen that actually at IIASA we have been and we are doing a lot of these transdisciplinary research that this new ISC report will be asking for. So I can assure you at IIASA we are, I think, really cutting edge, also doing there, not only in the quantitative modeling, also connecting quantitative and qualitative modeling, participatory modeling. I think there's really new methods being developed, and there's an appetite for these kind of new methods, and they are also becoming more accepted in the academic environment. And I think that's very important if we really want to make a change in reality.
Thank you very much, all 5 of you. This was a very dense, but it wasn't possible in other ways, summary of this extremely rich set of presentations and discussions we had over the day. What I'd like to do in the last minutes of being together here is sort of come back to the overall topic, the title of our conference. And there are sort of 3 main notions there. It's called systems analysis for reducing footprints and enhancing resilience. Many of the authors and many of the discussions have struggled to define what is meant by systems analysis. And this is an ongoing struggle at IIASA. It's a living concept, and over the decades, we've been working on this. Actually, it was interesting, if you may want to look it up, today's ORF, the Austrian Radio Online, has an interesting story by the Austrian historian Oliver Radkolb about the foundation of IIASA. He went to the archives looking what were the negotiations then, and he also reports on the name of IIASA. There were many different views. First, they want to call it a center on the problems of industrialized societies. And then Aurelio Poche, who was the head of the Club of Rome then, he was very instrumental also in establishing IIASA. He wanted to be focused on global modeling. And actually, as you may remember or may know, that the first, from the 72 to about 82, there was a big group chaired by Donella Meadows herself and Gerhard Bruckmann, an Austrian statistician who was also a member of the Club of Rome. And they published actually a book, The First Decade of Global Modeling, at IIASA. But there never was a book published on the second or third decade. So the global modeling somehow came out of fashion, and even also at IIASA was sort of moving more to sectoral analysis. I'm not trying, we shouldn't try here now to give a definitive definition. There are some definitions also on the IIASA website. What is systems analysis? That was then the final choice by Howard Rafer. He just said, I'm the first director, I decide the name, and this was applied systems analysis. Sometimes it helps to have also a negative definition. That actually I find quite inspiring. Kenneth Boulding, he was mentioned already this morning by Sigrid Stagel, and he actually was a frequent visitor at IIASA in the early years. He once gave a nice negative definition. So what is the opposite? And his short saying is, the devil's name is sub-optimization. Very short and very concise, and actually it captures sort of, if we only looking at a closed system and not see the externalities, how is it embedded in a bigger system, then we may just go for the wrong thing instead of considering this broader system. Okay, then the second notion there is reducing footprints. I think it's clear that we mean ecological footprints. Of course, IIASA had a very big intellectual footprint over the years, and hopefully will continue to have it in the future. But of course, I think that is consensus that we want to reduce our ecological footprint. And the last notion is probably the one that is still in statu nascendi, in an early phase of being defined, that is enhancing resilience. I've heard several of the speakers using different definitions of resilience. The problem is that resilience, just as it stands alone as a noun, it is sort of shock absorbing capacity bouncing back to an earlier stage. But this is not enough. I mean, we want to see progress. We want to do better than we were before. So some people, like the International Science Council, they've written about not bouncing back, but bouncing forward. And sort of the question is, we have an upward line of development. Hopefully, it's interrupted by a disaster. And after the disaster, do we just go back to the same level, or do we go up to a higher level? Are we in better shape in our capabilities, or whatsoever? And therefore, at IIASA, we are having quite some discussions now, because we are also trying to do a new flagship report, something that also attempts at least to summarize some of the key lessons IIASA has learned over the past 50 years, and possibly sort of put a new notion on the table, what could also complement the SDGs for future discussions. And clearly the notion of resilience or resilient as an adjective is very prominent among these discussions. So what we tentatively have sort of as a working title of this flagship report is Systems Analysis for Boosting Resilient Well-Being. It makes clear that resilience in itself cannot be the end of itself. I mean, the feudal system has been very resilient over centuries. Slavery has been very resilient over centuries. We want to see progress. So what matters is the ultimate end, in the words of Daniela Meadows, which is well-being, but we want resilient well-being. We want well-being that can absorb all kinds of shocks. So in this first round, I want to now quickly ask each of you in your group what sort of understanding of resilience or resilient well-being, either as an adjective or as a noun, came out of your work, and what is your view? Maybe just one or two sentences by each before then we open up to public discussion. So Linda, you may want to give it a start.
Hello? Okay. Yeah, just quickly, well, I think data is key to resilience. I mean, some of the presentations showed patterns of understanding COVID, which can be used in the future. It's transferable to other countries, and therefore, I think processing data, new advances in AI, this is a key to giving us information for not just bouncing back, but for moving forward.
Yeah.
I'd rather address the first 2 points, actually, but I'll stick to resilience. I think that what came out of our talk, well, one thing, yeah, resilience is more than bouncing back. It's about being adaptive. It's about being able to adjust and so on. But we talked about, deep root changes. And so sometimes if you're just dealing with resilience, you're relieving symptoms, but you're not really fixing the system either. So actually, if you're resilient on a superficial level, you might not actually fix the problem. And so we wanted to recognize that being resilient could have negative connotations, not just because you're trapped in a bad system, but even in a way that you're not aware that what you need is deeper change. So I think resilience has multi-levels in that sense.
Okay.
Yes, so the resilience, for me, it would be when we manage to shift from thinking on individual, sectoral, local, national security to collective, cross-sectoral, global resilience. For me, resilience is a global concept because we are living in a world which is teleconnected through trade, through international agreements, and therefore we need to move from security to resilience.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, my answer will be based on discussions that we started recently as part of one of the IIASA initiatives that is called Transformations Within Reach. So what I'm saying is reflection of mainly what my colleagues actually taught me as part of this. And I think important part of resilience is agency. And if we talk about bouncing forward, which of course is the right way to look at it, there are many forwards. And I think resilience is about, or an important component of resilience is for us people to be able and be empowered to define this forward. So where we want to bounce after a shock should be our decision and should be within reach for us. And then I think we can, this kind of setting can be called resilient.
Thank you.
Okay, so over the last couple of years, I've been going back to the origins more of the concept of resilience, namely to psychology. And resilience has been, in my opinion, overused in many different aspects. And I'm working with school students in Austria, for example, and we see a lot of climate anxiety. We see depressions with young people. We see they are completely overwhelmed with what's going on in the world. And then us oldies telling them, you have to do it better when you're old. We can't do anything. And I think that's completely unfair, of course. But then we try not only to educate these people, the young generation, about climate knowledge, about this knowledge, planetary health knowledge. No, we want to also enable them to do something, to increase their resilience, to bounce forward. Once they have this setback, oh, I'm depressed today, what should I do? No, I can do something. I can be individually but collectively active in doing something about this crisis. So that's how I currently approach the topic of resilience.
Thank you very much. You see already these 5 people have a very rich spectrum, all different aspects. But now we invite you all to express your views. We have a few minutes for general discussion. You can either address the panelists or just express your opinion. That is your chance now. And I'm not sure whether we can also listen. I don't have the facilities to see whether there are any comments online, but maybe somebody from technical services can see whether people have online comments. So who wants to add? Yes, please. There's a microphone is coming.
I just wanted to mention a contribution from one of my collaborators, Ariella Helfgott, who talks about resilience, saying you've got to be explicit and ask 4 questions. Resilience of what? Resilience to what? Resilience for whom? Over what time frame, and people skirt around those issues. And if you skirt around those issues, you can have a lot of injustices. So she does that kind of work and integrates that thinking into scenarios work. And I can certainly share a paper from her if anybody's interested.
Thank you very much. Seems like a very useful this differentiation. Yes. Any other comments? Yes, please. Yep.
Okay, I would like to thank all of the speakers past 2 days. Okay. We're talking about resilience. Actually, one thing about resilience these days is becoming sometimes a fashion also. You know, many people talk about resilience. But we have talked about resilience to what in water, energy, different things. How can we, I think one of the challenges that at least I'm working on it, how can I integrate all of this into one, for example, as urban resilience? I mean, water, energy, natural disaster, you know, pandemics. Because each of them, you know, look at it in a different way, and how to integrate all of them in a nexus approach, in a system approach, that we bring various objectives of water resilience. I mean, cities these days are facing with the water problem, energy problem, natural disaster, and pandemics. Integrating these things together, this is one of the challenges, I think, that if we can focus our activities into one objective, I think it will be a good direction, even for IIASA.
Thank you very much. I mean, you started out saying that the notion of resilience is very fashionable these days, which is clearly the case. So we at IIASA are thinking whether we should take it on board, and if so, in what way. And I mean, there's also somebody told us, gave us the feedback, there's, from a marketing perspective, well, there's the Stockholm Resilience Center, they have this in their name, you are the Institute for Systems Analysis. Well, but doing good systems analysis doesn't exclude using the term of resilience as well. So I think we need to have an open discussion on this and see how, but it makes sense. Yes, I see two hands in the back.
Thank you, and thank you all for all of what you did today. I'm an environmental historian, and therefore I tend to historicize concepts. And what I think you're doing is twofold. One is you are avoiding society by privileging the individual because of the psychological history or legacy of the resilience term, which is also one of the critiques of resilience. And you might want to address that, privileging the individual to society. And the second thing that comes to my mind is, I think what is in the resilience term, which is not in sustainability, or how sustainable development came to be framed, was that it was working in a linear world. That there would be progress, like steady state progress. And resilience is an advancement over sustainability in some ways because it accepts that the world is not linear, but highly feedbacked and highly threshold and tipping point dependent. So it might be modern, but there might be a reason for that. Yeah. Thank you.
Very good point. The notion sustainability is often used as a shorthand for sustainable development. And it's not exactly the same. It has a somewhat different connotation because the sustainable development was really as defined by the Brundtland Commission, which, by the way, was also commissioned now 40 years ago. It took them 4 years to come out with the report then. But what they try to do is really merge, if you want, marry two very different streams. The international development community, by the World Bank, IMF, and so they wanted to increase GDP and diminish poverty, and then the environment agenda, which was sort of Stockholm Environment Conference and so on, and then Rio 92 really brought them both together with the notion of sustainable development, and then it took another 2 decades until the UN finally settled then in 2015 on the sustainable development goals. Now, what you just said is really in a world today that is sort of characterized what some people call a polycrisis. We have moved away from sort of the linear thinking. Everything is going to get gradually better. We feel several deep crises happening at the same time, and also there's this increased understanding of the nonlinearity of the interactions of the tipping points. So in that context, the resilient as an adjective, what future development needs to be, seems to be appropriate. But other thought, yes. And there also was a second hand in the back. Yeah, first this and then you.
Hello? Okay. So I'm an engineer, and I think the way we think about resilience is a bit different to the way people think about it here. Because here I don't see people discussing the trade-offs that resilience brings. Because I think there exists a trade-off between resilience and optimality. For example, the reason our current supply chain systems are not resilient at all is because they have been hyper-optimized to minimize stock levels and so on, and they're so lean that any kind of disturbance can result in a massive shock. But, and that's going too far. But I think that there is something that we haven't discussed here much, which is that resilience comes at a cost. Like when you're designing something, you can design it to be more resilient, but that means you need to use more material, you need to make it slower and so on. So I'm wondering if there is more thinking in systems analysis about that, about whether we can make things just as resilient as necessary, but not more than that.
Yeah, very good point. It requires redundancy, and that is, of course, less cost efficient. Yes, please, the floor. Can the microphone come here?
Thank you. I won't repeat my talk from this morning, but as someone who's worked with the concept of resilience in research and practice for nearly 20 years, I have a love-hate relationship with the word. And I think it is at the same time a very popular and useful concept, and also a very problematic and contested concept. I do think that when one sees how resilience is put into practice in on-the-ground projects, the advances there are incredible. So I don't think it's actually necessary for IIASA to spend a lot of time looking at the science around resilience, but actually to see the innovations that are being made on the ground in implementing systems approaches to resilience on the ground.
Yeah. Very good point. If I remember correctly, you made the broad using talking about resilience for development, which also brings this improving conditions with it.
Hello, hi. I'm a relatively junior researcher here, so I say this with humility. I feel like we have to be also careful with the wording, for example, polycrisis or multiple crisis. I feel it's not just about multiple challenges, but it's also something meta. In that sense, I feel it's a meta crisis, because I feel in some ways it's also crisis about our assumptions, our institutions. That's one point. And then the second point is maybe sustainable well-being for all is a better kind of a term to encapsulate rather than a resilience, which has maybe more multiple interpretations.
Thank you very much. We are coming close to the end, but if there's one or two final comments, we can still accommodate them. If not, then I think let me just thank all the speakers again, and then in particular the 5 panelists who did such a nice job in summarizing the speakers. Thank you. And now it gives me great pleasure to invite one of the former Director Generals of IIASA, Detlof von Winterfeld, to share a few reflections with us. Thank you.
Hello. I'm absolutely delighted to be here on the 50th anniversary. I never thought that IIASA would live that long. I go back to, believe it or not, 1975. My first appointment at IIASA was as a research scholar in what's called the Management and Technology Group, and I also worked with the Energy Group, which I think is still operating, right? They're still using the same kind of models, I understand. Is K1 here? He's not here anymore. Anyway, so I can't comment on the first 3 years because I came in the 3rd year of IIASA's existence, but I kind of followed it for the last 47 years. All of you know the history of IIASA. I'm not going to go into this at this point, but it was dealing with bridging the East and the West, communist versus capitalist, northern industrialized countries, to bridge the gap between those countries with systems analysis. And by the way, I heard a very nice word by a colleague the other day. He said, when I think about systems analysis, I think about IIASA. So when I talk to people, what is systems analysis? I think that's what IIASA does. Look it up, So that's an easy way. Well, I returned in 2009 as director, and the world had changed a lot. We had many new members from the South enriching IIASA's agenda. The world also has become more complicated, highly interconnected economically, which I actually thought at that time was a benefit to all because it would reduce the tensions because countries had to work together. Well, doesn't look like that, does it now? Not completely. New problems arose, climate change particularly. I don't know if you know it, but in 1978, there was a book about climate change. It was written at IIASA. So we're in this business for a long time. Also, new opportunities arose. I mean, not everything got worse. Communications technologies, new energy technologies, in systems analysis, artificial intelligence, and big data analytics. I'm sure that is on the horizon for IIASA as well. Now, through all these years, IIASA has maintained a steady focus, solving problems of its members, finding solutions. And in ending, I would like to thank my successors. Pavel Kabert, is he still there? Albert van Jaarsveld, he certainly is there because he has to speak in a minute. And don't forget the IIASA research staff and administrative staff for using a nautical analogy to keep the ship upright in troubled waters, and we are now in sort of troubled waters, and move it forward to hopefully glorious horizon. So with that, thank you very much. I enjoyed my time here, both at IIASA and my 3 years. By the way, I was director, not general director, not DG. That was invented after me. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Detlef, and thanks for being ready without warning to say a few words here, just having arrived from California this morning. So with this, we come to the very last part of our agenda, and I hand over to Albert for announcing the poster winners and some other concluding comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang, and thank you, Detlef, for those few words. Appreciate it. All right, so I think we've got a few formal duties to conclude with. First of all, our incredible posters downstairs. I hope some of you have had time to scan through them. I was remissing with somebody about the way we used to generate posters in our days with letter set. You know, you have to get it in a straight line and not get it spacing between letters. It was a nightmare. It was just beautiful to see the way you guys do it these days. But anyway, we have a list of winners. I guess that we want to. Do we have the certificates available? Are they there? Can I? Because I guess I have to call up the names. I haven't got them in front of me, so it's difficult to call them up. Do we have the names? Then I can call them up. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. So our third place poster winner for this particular session goes to Dan Wang. I don't see an institutional affiliation, but I hope he's around. Is he around here? Oh, he's online. Oh, Dan is the lady. Sorry, behind me. I can't see. There you go. Dan Wang, from our side, congratulations. We really appreciate it and enjoyed your poster. And I hope that we'll see you again some stage at IIASA. Thank you. Thank you very much and congratulations. Okay, all the best. Our second candidate, I think, is also here, if I'm not mistaken, Quinhan Zhu, for the poster that was presented. Yeah, please come up, sir. And then our first place winner for the posters during this conference goes to an online participant. Apparently he is available online. I don't know if you can see him behind us. I think it'll be good to see you. Stefano Galelli. Okay, this is a poster about the Mekong River Basin, and Stefano, as our first prize winner, you of course will receive a fully paid for visit to IIASA during our next conference that we have at the Institute, and we look forward to welcoming you to IIASA and showing you around. But thank you very much for your participation, and well done. Okay, well done. Right, thank you for that. Well done to all and everybody involved in the poster sessions. I really was quite impressed, to say the least. I'm compelled, after the discussion we've had previously, to just make two remarks, if I may, before I formally close. The first is that I want us to recall the idea of systems and what resilience means to me as a biologist, at least, and I think it'll be interesting in that regard. For me, systems or ecosystems have buffering capabilities. And those buffering capabilities that allow them to absorb shocks and to recover depends on the strength of the feedback systems within that system. And for me, a resilient system is a system that generally has strong feedback systems and allows it to recover fairly quickly and hopefully manage to advance into the future as well. It was when those feedback systems break down that you start falling over the tipping points and the system changes and the system becomes nonlinear. So let's just keep that in mind in terms of thinking about how we use resilience, but that's just a remark from my side. Then just about the conference, I think what we've learned over the last day or so is that IIASA is clearly learning from its background and its historic expertise in areas of optimization and rational decision-making, is now coming to understand that in order to bring these concepts into applied spaces of decision-making in societies, that we have to find ways of using those concepts and engage with society in ways that allows us to find feasible pathways moving forward. And I think that's really what we're trying to achieve using all these tools that we have available. These pathways, of course, are informed. They're not going to be optimal. They're probably not going to be purely rational, but they're going to be informed by values. They're going to be informed by priorities that societies may have, and also the contextual nature of the particular space that you're engaging with as well at the end of the day. So I think that's just sort of a thought from my side in terms of what I heard over the last couple of days, which has been very, very valuable. And in that regard, I would like to, from my side, thank each and every participant at this conference for their valuable inputs, the speakers, the people that participated in the poster sessions, our panelists, very importantly, our online participants that are a big part of the audience for this particular meeting. We really appreciate all of your inputs, and of course our guests, honorary guests and other people that joined us for various sessions along the way. But even if you were just chairing a session for us, we really appreciate the tremendous input you've made, and we look forward to working with all of you to take IIASA into the future. There's, of course, a lot of thanks due to many for the last day and a half that we've had here. I would like to start off with Elena Rowanskaya and Victor Broekman. I think the two people that pulled together this program and have brought all of us together. And they've worked with a team of people that was part of the committee that put the sessions together. But thank you to both of you and your teams for significant contributions and the sterling effort to have us here. Elena and Victor, thank you. And then the two support teams, both from IIASA, as well as from the Academy of Sciences, that all pitched in to make it possible for us to have this meeting. It's clear to everybody there's a lot of background work that went on, and we really appreciate all those contributions, including our technical folks at the back there that really assisted us a lot. Thank you very much. Let's maybe just deal with that first. Thank you. Okay. Now, I also have to end off by thanking our hosts, the Academy of Sciences, for not only the facility, this beautiful facility, but of course for being a living partner for 50 years to IIASA. We really appreciate that. And in the sentiments of Nelson Mandela, I would like to thank you for everything that you've done for us in the past, but I especially want to thank you for what you're going to do for us in the future. And especially the cocktail event downstairs after this. But so I'm standing between you and something to eat and some beverages. But thank you from my side to all of you. It's been a wonderful 1.5 days. And thank you for sharing your time and your expertise and all your knowledge with us. And I hope you have safe travels back home, and we see you back at IIASA as soon as possible. Thank you.